But then again, Ali was a true fighter, and those days are long gone. Indeed, Merry Democrat, I agree with every part of what you said, except for me, the memory of those times is very vivid. I mean, I remember Muhammad Ali very well. I remember the way we used to talk about him at school. I remember the time when he had that extraordinary fight in Zaire, as it were, then was the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as it is again, which is the so-called rumble in the jungle. I never really liked that expression. I think with Joe Fraser was his opponent. So all of that is very recent to me, and it's dismaying to me that it's all gone with the wind, if you like. Again, not perhaps a book I particularly like, but that's another story. Gone away, and it makes me very sad. Let's see what others say. There was a real sense that Europe is reaching a tipping point, a sense of frustration that their narrative about Russia being on her knees is getting more unbelievable with each waking hour. Do you think the EU and NATO will become a single entity in order to fight a physical war with Russia? 2 points to this, Danich. The first point about a tipping point, about growing frustration, about growing anger, that although throwing all these things at Russia and it isn't working. I think you're absolutely right about that. That is one of the things which is making this so dangerous, because we are, of course, on this escalator of escalation and ever more sanctions, which is where we're heading. We don't really seem to find a way out, because people who are frustrated become frightened, and they become angry, and when they're angry they become dangerous. And I do hope that we don't end up in a physical war with Russia. I think that'd be a calamity, and I still trust that there are people who don't want us to go there. But I think that your point about the EU and NATO becoming a single entity is unfortunately in very real danger of becoming true. Already I've seen Russians, Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, who's now the deputy chair of the Security Council, the Russian Security Council, who say that the EU is now simply the political arm of NATO. It's part of the alliance led by the United States. So there we go. Mr. Mercouris, have you ever considered living someplace other than London, England? Well, I have many, many times. I would say I love London. I've lived here, well, all my adult life and through much of my childhood. For me, it is very much home. It shares this quality with Athens, which is, of course, the other place that I, have a strong familial connection to. I was born in Athens, but so it's, it would be something of a, break to leave London, but, who knows? One day, and Oklahoma does sound an amazing place. I've heard wonderful things about it, and I'm absolutely open to that idea. But for the moment, as I said, I live in London. I have my family here. I can't see myself leaving at the moment. So good evening to everybody. Everybody's saying these nice words, and it's a great joy to see you all. I hope that, by the way, that I will be able to get through a greater proportion of the questions than I did last week. It's now clear that for the moment, we're not able to save all the questions because of issues with the way this system works. We're going to have discussions about it with locals. And I hope before long, when we get a producer as well, it'll be different. But for the moment, I'm going to do my best answering as many questions as possible. So this is from Alan Watson. Will the major UK political parties get a shock tomorrow in the local elections? I would like to think so. I'm afraid I think that it's more likely that we're going to get a certain swing from Conservative to Labour, simply because at the moment the inertia of the system means that alternatives are not really well established in the public mind. They might exist, in fact I'm sure they do exist, but for the moment I don't think they've really broken through into the public mind. So we'll see what happens. And it's good to see people from all these places, from Calgary, from California, from Krakow. Alex Christoforou was recently in Krakow. I've heard absolutely wonderful things about that city, and love to go, by the way. From Zarael, did you ever get my email about a week or two ago? Could you actually please resend it? I'm getting so many emails at the moment, and what with childcare responsibilities, I'm beginning to become overwhelmed with things. So absolutely do send it to me, and I apologize. And I apologize if I haven't seen it, Zara L. And I have a question. Keep Scholz or risk a bigger hardliner in Germany? I'm going to make an observation here. I think a weak chancellor in some ways is even more dangerous than a hardliner, because a hardliner might understand eventually that there are limits and might say so far but no further. Whereas a weak person doesn't have that ability to stop. And it's the ability, the capacity to stop, to say no with authority and to stick with that position. That is what this situation is calling for at the moment. So on balance, I'd say a strong chancellor, even if it is a hardliner, as opposed to a weak chancellor like Scholz, who will always in the end agree to whatever hardline demand is made of him. This is the third time host lost connection. I can see or hear the scream, only the comments. Oh dear, I'm very sorry. I hope others aren't having the same problem. After Russia has annexed Bessarabia, Romania, as a result of the Russia-Turkish war, Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812. Merry Democrat, you have a great knowledge of history. And one of his goals was to re-establish the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which had been divided up between Russia, Prussia, and Austria some 20 years ago. I surmise that ever since 1795, the idea of reversing the partitioning of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is a dominant theme. I'm afraid it is among some people in Poland. I don't think they're anywhere close to being a majority, but you do find some people in Poland who unfortunately remain very attached to that idea. And you also find some people in other places like Lithuania, even Belarus, who are attracted to it for all sorts of reasons. Others talking about how admired America was by Indians, people from Iceland, people from Romania, from Norway, Kalispera from Thrace. Very good to hear you from Thrace. Thank you very much. Want to meet me in Cyprus end of month, going to visit. Oh, this is all about Alan Watson and Zaroel. Well, I hope you do, in fact, meet up very soon. And Oklahoma is a awesome place. I've heard that. Somebody at Selcid, Kensal Rise is very close, within walking distance of where I live. So we should certainly try people at the Mason-Dixon line. I'm going to jump those. I'm going to go straight to questions because, as people will understand, there's limited amount of time. In Bosnia, Muslim side enforced election on Croats by which Muslims going to elect Croat representatives. This is a political bullet towards Croats. Things are only not escalating with roadblocks because of the Americans. I agree. I think this whole situation in the Balkans, I'm not talking about the specific issue about which I'm not well informed, but I think this whole situation in the Balkans reflects a very depressing reality, which is that it is an artificial situation which is enforced by NATO and American power. The moment that is perceived to weaken, you will see an escalation, a crisis, and that is inevitable. So it's entirely a situation which has been imposed, which is artificial, and which is unsustainable. As both sides' sanctions bite in Europe, can you foresee any NATO and or EU countries breaking ranks and associated popular unrest. I think it is possible. In fact, I think it's highly likely. The only question is how long. And that may take a very long time. And it may also be, of course, that there will be all sorts of steps taken in to make sure that when those protests do come, they will be they will be suppressed. But France, certainly a case to look at. There's long, big protests in France despite Macron's re-election. There's an interesting parliamentary election coming. I personally don't expect any huge changes as a result of that parliamentary election. We did a program about it recently, Alex Christoforou and I, which you can see on the Duran and obviously here on Locals. But the other place which I think you might want to keep an eye on is Germany. And I think in Germany, especially in Eastern Germany, I suspect there's lots of people who are very uneasy with the direction events are taking. So let's keep an eye out. Many countries where this can happen, but don't underestimate the power of the centre, by which I mean both the political centre in Brussels, but also the political centre that is to be found in all Western states, which remains very much in control, which has shown a ruthless capacity to retain control, and which is completely committed to these policies. Do you believe Western leaders are actually pushing for a hot war with Russia and or China? It's hard for me to make sense otherwise. That's a very good question. And I was recently saw an article on the Quincy Institute's website, Responsible Statecraft, which asked the exactly same question. Is that the point that the article was making is that if we want to avoid a hot war with Russia, then why aren't we doing everything we possibly can to talk ourselves into actually getting involved in such a hot war with Russia? And China too, by the way, over Taiwan. So it's a good question. I think that there are an awful lot of people, members of the political class in the West, who, after the end of the Cold War, developed this dangerous belief that the West is invincible and don't understand how dangerous war is and what a catastrophe it would be for all humanity. And as a result, they're saying things, the sort of things which in the Cold War nobody ever said or would have been able to survive politically and say. I still believe that there are enough forces of sanity and restraint to prevent us escalating into a full-scale hot war. But I've never been more concerned about the danger of one happening. Will Russia attack Finland before Finland joins NATO? No, I don't think so. I don't think the Russians have any intention of attacking Finland. As I've said many times, I don't think they're happy about Finland joining NATO. But I think from their point of view, the military side of things, I have heard, and I've heard this from pretty, people who know, that there's a fairly solid view in Moscow that in some ways it simplifies planning to have countries like Finland and Sweden, Russian military planning, countries like them in Sweden, Finland, in NATO, rather than outside it, because frankly, they're hostile countries. If there was ever a war, they would quickly join NATO in any war against Russia. And having them in NATO means that you can prepare for that possibility more quickly. Tonight in Copenhagen, there's an outside live stream where Zelensky will speak to all Danes. Wonder if he will bring some Azov Nazi guys to join the live stream like in Greece. I don't know. I think not. I think the point about having those people in the parliament in Greece was that, of course, one of them at least was Greek. And of course, that was a massive miscalculation because though he was Greek, he was also a member of the Azov battalion. And in Greece, that was simply unacceptable. Greetings from Baden-Baden. Well, that's thank you. I mean, lots of people from many places, but Baden-Baden is a place which I haven't quite visited, but I've been fairly close to. And it's great to meet people from all these places. What do you think about capitalism in current shape and form viable model. I've actually read the expression late capitalism to describe it. I think this is an extremely decayed form of capitalism, deeply evolved. It's taken many of the classical features of capitalism to extreme levels. And of course, it's also doing things which go so radically against classical economics, which is supposed to be the economics that capitalism is all about, though I've always been skeptical of that view myself. I don't think it is viable. I think before long, the current model that we have is going to collapse under its own weight. And I think this late capitalism, which has eroded the dynamism of economies and financialized them, and which has created all this grotesque inequality, is ultimately going to collapse under the weight of its own inefficiencies. Good afternoon from Boston. Wow. Can report anecdotally that nobody in elite academia and its donors feeding system seem aware of the imminent global economic and possibly geopolitical catastrophes. Do they know something we don't? They'll be protected from the worst fallout, or are they the ultimate ostriches with heads in the sand? I think that it's possibly the same, the two at the same time. Now, my wife is an academic. I know how sheltered academics, people who are, secure in the academic world, particularly, those who are in, have, livings, can be from the sort of eddies and flows that happen. And I also know how incredibly tough and competitive and difficult academic life can be, and how establishing oneself in academic life can be, and how unbelievably all-absorbing it is for somebody who's trying to battle into that position of getting security in it. And of course, in the first case, those who are already secure, that makes them complacent and out of touch. And in the second case, they're so all absorbed and so afraid, probably, of breaking breaking links with the rest, appearing to say unorthodox things. That, as I said, you don't have those kind of discussions, which in academic communities you could. So no video here. Well, look, I'm very sorry. I don't know what the explanation for that is. I don't think there's very much people can do. So I hope people can at least hear me, and at least most people can see me. And I will just plow on because I don't really see there's much choice. So there will be no border between Poland and Ukraine, said Duda. Interpret that as you will. Well, I don't understand that either. I mean, that seems to be extremely alarming idea. It points to annexation of at least parts of Ukraine. Kalispera from Serbia. Is there a possibility for Greece to turn away from the Anglo presence and influence last 200 years? Isn't it natural for a great political nation such as Greeks to turn towards the new world of China, especially Russia, who is the only country who can protect Greece against Turkey? Actually, France and Americans would fight to the last Greek, best case scenario. Well, I would like to believe that. Perhaps one day it will happen. I know that there are many, many, many Greeks who feel exactly in the way that you described. But the political class in Greece is practically to a man and woman Euro-Atlanticist. It is deeply entrenched. It's difficult to see it changing its position anytime soon. So others apparently can see and hear me, which is a relief. Do you see the situation with President Milanovic of Croatia saying he would block Finland in joining NATO? Medvedev already made a comment that he should be expecting some retaliation from Kiev. Well, I don't know about Kiev. I think much more likely the president of Croatia needs to be worried about retaliation from Brussels, from the NATO and EU bureaucracies, and also, dare I say it, from people in Croatia. I would have thought that a president of Croatia who tries to block Swedish and Finnish accession might find himself in very difficult political circumstances if you try to stick to that position. I think you can see through these kind of comments from people like President Milanovic that there are plenty of people who understand how misguided and wrong all these policies are. But we should not assume that these people have the power to stop them or prevent them in the kind of way that we're talking about. Where are Sweden and Finland on prospective Russian military operations? Well, I don't know what kind of plans they have. I can only repeat what I've said before. There's going to be, if they do join NATO, it simplifies, as I said, Russian military planning, because the Russians now believe that the major cockpit of war will be the Arctic, and Scandinavia is an important part of that, the Arctic and the North Atlantic. So it would mean that they would be able to focus there. So I hope that's that's where we are. Some people have got the sound, not the video. Others don't have the video. Others don't have the. I hope everybody has the sound, because without the sound, I don't know what to do. But some people seem to have the video too. Very bad. Very bad that's happening. I hope most of you can both hear and see me. Serbia has a very bad taste in their mouth about that. I presume you're referring to the situation in Bosnia. I agree. The Greens in the UK are asking UK to leave NATO. Is this possible? No, it's not possible. The political class in Britain is utterly committed to keeping Britain in NATO. And I'm going to say something. If the Greens were ever to make a breakthrough and find themselves in government, they would quickly change their position as well. Hello from Falkirk. I presume that's in Scotland, and I'm delighted that you're joining us. Did you see the video of a miles-long train of tanks apparently heading for the Russian border in Finland? Is Finland preparing for war against Russia? I did see that film. I did see that video. And I do wonder what it means, actually, because I think for Finland to try and get into a war with Russia is ludicrous. And I suspect it's another sign of the nervousness of a very inexperienced, very Euro-Atlanticist Finnish government. They probably got themselves into believing that there's a real danger from Russia, when, of course, there is none. So to proceed, about Bosnia, Germans are the biggest problem today, as much as they were in 1914 and 41. My friend, even without Americans, because the Americans just follow the tradition. This is all about the situation in Bosnia. I think there's some truth to this. Certainly, if you're talking about the breakup of Yugoslavia back in the 90s, I can remember that some German politicians, including the German foreign minister of the period, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, played an extremely, well, I'm going to say it, sinister role. And they seem to have this animus against Serbia, which presumably goes back to the events of the world wars, which I have to say I find strange. I think Poland will integrate the west of Ukraine, and Ukraine will be no more. I wouldn't be surprised. Much discussion about this. We've talked about this extensively on our live streams, Alex and I, and in our programs. It seems to me that there will be a clash between the EU and Russia on the rate at which the energy price will have to be paid. The ruble at the rate before the start of the conflict in Ukraine, or the ruble at a future rate, because the more the euro will lose value, the more the Eurozone will have to put on the table to buy the same quantity of rubles. Well, actually, you make a wonderfully good point. It's a point many people have made, by the way, which is that pricing gas in rubles and asking the West, demanding payment in rubles for gas shifts decisively the terms of trade. And given that it will be Gazprom Bank, which will be converting the euros into rubles, that means that it also gives the Russians an opportunity to, in effect, dictate pricing to the entire Eurozone, for gas. So it's quite a big issue, actually, and we'll see where it happens. But the EU, the Commission, is desperately trying to resist this. But one gets the sense that no one says, apart from the Hungarians, no one says that they're complying with Putin's decree. But practically everyone, except a few outliers, Poland, the Baltic states, Finland, practically everyone else secretly is. So it's a very strange situation, and I wonder how it will sort itself out in the end. Could it be clearly stated that the US and NATO, but in particular the US, is purchasing a proxy war with Russia with the idea that they can create a roadway into Russia's rich resources by going across the scorched earth Ukrainian landscape? Yes, I think that can be absolutely clearly stated. And I think that's the game plan. I think the idea is bleed Russia dry, weaken it as far as possible, then go in, basically take it over, and gain control of its resources. That is very much the game plan that many people have, and isolate China too. My own view is that not only will it fail, but it will fail disastrously. At the moment, despite all the claims to the contrary, it is the West that is weakening if you look at the economic picture. And yes, the Russians are having all kinds of economic problems. They have to sort lots of things out, but at least they have a pathway to doing that. And at the end of the day, I think they're going to come out stronger. That's my view. I know lots of people don't agree. Lots of Arabic messaging from the Nazis under Azov terrorists of the world unite. Wow, interesting. I didn't know. Latest reports apparently is that they're basically switched. That they're no longer able to communicate at all. That their communications have gone dead. So from Zaro, recent and IT deals with exactly this. Recent and it deals with exactly this evening's theme. Pity you didn't get it, but I believe China is the next big thing, and how this will affect the global economy is clear. We can put on some warm clothing, we in Germany. Well, Zarel, it looks as if I must definitely find this email of yours because it sounds like an enormously important email. So let me absolutely find it. And by the way, I agree with you. I mean, what we've achieved with Russia, this economic war, is bad enough. But what's going to happen if we extend this to China? It just doesn't bear thinking of. It'll be orders of magnitude worse. I'm shocked by Mitsotaki's animosity towards Russia. The Greeks should have remained neutral, as also friendly with Ukraine. Yeah, I agree, actually. But, Mitsotakis, in my opinion, isn't so much hostile to Russia. He's deeply, profoundly loyal to the United States. I think that's what that's really all about. But there we go. Let's continue. Will China let Russia lose? Will we see Chinese marching under the Arc de Triomphe? China does not want Russia to lose. It won't let Russia lose. Now, in terms of military affairs, I mean, I don't think Russia actually needs China involved in Ukraine. Economics, it's another matter. And what we're going to see is that sturdily, Russia's economy is going to be supported by China, and that has consequences. I'm afraid it also means that Russia's economy will be integrated with China's, and given that China's economy is so much bigger, integration does involve, and we have to be realistic about this, a very great degree of absorption as well. So this is a huge block. China will be the dominant party, and it will be the one that will reap the biggest benefits from this conflict. So let's see. Will Russia eat the gold? I'm not sure I completely understand that. I don't think so. More questions have suddenly appeared. Sorry. So I'm going back to the start. Would you please do a show on the geopolitical significance of the Arctic as it keeps coming up with reference to Washington and Russia? We certainly will. That's a very, very good topic. It's a huge topic. We actually did do one long ago when we first started doing videos for the Duran. And it's certainly a topic we need to revisit because so much more has happened since. Heard today on the news, Europe to ban buying oil gas from Russia. Laugh out loud. Actually, what I've heard, it may be that this is more up to date, but that they've run into resistance from some of the smaller East European states, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, whatever, and that they're going to talk about this again tomorrow. But ultimately, I think the direction of travel is exactly where you say. We have a tight oil market. We have a tight energy market. We have diesel shortages in Europe, diesel shortages in the United States. We have prices, an inflation crisis. One would have thought the last thing we would do is cut ourselves off in Europe from our most important supplier of oil. But that, it seems, is what we are determined to do to ourselves. It's completely irrational, at least I think so. But there we go. We can't look for rational thinking from everybody. Whereas the story of BlackRock, promises were made, boys. I'm not sure I know what that refers to. And thank you, Zarel, about smashing the like button. That's very kind. So the USSR makes Moscow the new capital, isn't it? Winter War was conducted because of Stalin's paranoia about. Oh, I see. This is about Finland, Finland, and the security of Leningrad, St. Petersburg. I think that any idea that St. Petersburg can be threatened today is based on a complete misunderstanding of the military dynamics. We must be careful not today to automatically think that the military balances of the 1940s are relevant to the very different geopolitical picture that we have now. It does look as if there's been some questions that I must have missed. Sorry about this, because now I'm reading about the Pope. Very rare reality check coming from this Pope. I wonder you're just throwing Putin a bone as a means of getting a meeting. This is all about the fact that NATO was barking out the door. I'll tell you what I personally think about this. I think that what happened was that there were some people in the Vatican who pointed out to Francis that his positions on Ukraine are destroying the whole process of ecumenism in terms, or at least of dialogue with the Russian Orthodox Church. And I think from that point of view, that's probably why he probably tried to row back a bit and put off any idea of going to Kiev, which had been all but confirmed a few weeks ago, and said that he wants to go to Moscow instead, and why he's now admitting that, NATO expansion might have been the root cause of the war. I don't think it represents, though, a fundamental change of stance. Now, someone says Francis, as an Argentinian living during the CIA coups of the 1970s, has always been red-pilled on the shabby crap the CIA and the US are up to around the world. Interesting. Okay. Eventually, Russia will have euros come out of their ears. What will it do with all the surplus euros, since it doesn't pay Russia to hold them inside Russia? Buy gold. Somebody's put that, and I have to say, I think that's Mercouris. I agree. I think that's the correct answer. The Russians have been worrying that all this mass of euros could be converted into rubles. That would make the ruble too strong. I think they will do exactly what Mercouris says. I think that over the next few months, you're going to see an increasing trend for the Russians to start buying gold in the international gold market. If EU is becoming the political arm of NATO, are the IMF and World Bank intended as NATO financial arm aligned to NATO global policy? NATO being effectively USA satellite anyway. What do you think G20 will do? Well, as to the first point, the IMF and World Bank have for ages, for all my adult lifehood, been agencies of US policy. They're absolutely part of the Washington consensus. Nobody should have any doubts about that. As for what the G20 will do, My guess is that it's on borrowed time and will very soon, in effect, fall apart. The next G20 summit is happening in Indonesia. The Indonesians have made it clear they want Putin there. I suspect the Western countries will nonetheless go, but you will already see that they will refuse to speak to Putin. So we will already have a breakdown within the G20 of G20, some G20 states talking to each other and not talking to other G20 states. So that's where I think it's going. So let's see what others have to say. Why would the US want to take over Russia's resources when they do not explore their own resources? Well, think about it. If you're a very ecologically minded person in the United States, if you fully signed up to the green agenda, to all of those things, if you don't want to see hydraulic fracking in your part of the world, you don't want to see keystone pipelines and all those sort of things, well, why not, if you still feel you need fossil fuels, why not take them from Russia instead? Far away, and you don't need to contaminate your own landscape with pipes and wells and all those things. You can find them elsewhere, far away from you in Russia. But of course, putting that aside, I only speak partly in jest there. I think there is that motive. But it isn't just a question of wanting Russia's resources for themselves. It's also denying Russia's resources to others, denying it to China, denying it to India, denying those resources to potential competitors to the US. To answer a question from Ronald B, no, the Russians won't eat gold, but they will use it increasingly to back their currency. And we know that's now policy. Patrushev, the Secretary of the Security Council, has essentially said so. So that's what they're going to do. Would Russia ever just cut off exports to EU and or NATO countries? As the sanctions pile up and increasingly ludicrous rhetoric emerges from the nations, why doesn't Russia just cut to the chase and cut them off? I think one reason the Russians are not wanting to do that, apart from the fact that, as I said, for the moment, they're actually making huge amounts of money from this trade, more than ever. One of the reasons the Russians don't do that is I think they also want to tell the rest of the world, look, the West goes, it imposes sanctions, it cuts trade links, it does do all those things. We, on the other hand, are an incredibly reliable trade partner. We never impose sanctions. We never do these sort of things. We act always with restraint. We separate the commercial from the political. If you enter into long-term obligations with us, you can be sure that we will fulfill all our side of those obligations. Would you consider doing a program on the geopolitical significance? Well, I think I've already answered that. So let's move on. Hard to imagine, Francis, and the term "red pilled" in the same sentence. I agree, actually. And lots of talk from tourists about gold and other things. As I said, I think also don't forget gold is perceived in Russia as having some value. So, it makes it a ruble that is linked to gold and other commodities is a ruble that Russians trust. And one of the big problems that the Russians have had over the last 30 years is that there's been little confidence in Russia, in the Russian currency. Now, they wanted a soft ruble up to now, so it's not been in their interest to try and change that, because from their point of view, they were focused on exports. But now that their economy is reorienting and moving towards a more self-sufficient approach, well, a strong ruble perhaps suddenly becomes more attractive. Has the US painted itself in a corner with the petrodollar? They wanted sanctions against Russia, but they never dreamed it would backfire on them. That's why they are there as long as it takes to bury Russia. What do you think? I think you're absolutely right. And by the way, on the US painting themselves into a corner and pursuing a sanctions policy that is working against US interests, there's been an extraordinary article in The Hill, one of the leading American political journals, one populated by neocons, which actually makes exactly the same point. It talks about the United States having maneuvered itself in a trap. Now let's see what others are saying. Everyone in Germany knows about the stupidity of Hans-Dietrich Genscher. This was perhaps the biggest mistake in post-World War II German affairs. Interesting. I think they made even bigger mistake, and I'll tell you what they are. It was the fact that they didn't come out straightforwardly and say, when they could have done, that Ukraine is not going to join NATO. And I think that had they done that, the whole crisis we have today would have been avoided. And if Germany had also acted to make sure that the Minsk Accords were complied with and that Ukraine acted according to them, well, then also we would not have been in the mess we're in today. Do Western elites and technocrats believe their storyline, or are they merely committed politically and economically and have no reverse gear? I think some do believe their own storyline. I mean, I listened to Annalena Baerbock, and I'm pretty sure that she believes the things that she's saying. Others, I am sure, are inwardly far more skeptical, but they are not prepared to break with the flow. And of course, some of them are utterly cynical, but deeply ideological at the same time. And you have to understand that ideological people can be extremely cynical as well. They can be, because, they are on a mission as they see it, and they believe that what they're doing is for all of everybody's ultimate good. They are prepared to act in cynical ways and can justify it to themselves in ways that most people can't. They made it the capital long. This is about St. Petersburg and Moscow, and I'm not going to discuss the Winter War and the position of St. Petersburg then. All I would say is that I don't think there's any danger of the same events repeating themselves. Let's see what others. Lots about the Winter War. By the way, the Winter War, for what it's worth, something I studied years and years ago, and I came to a very quick conclusion on the basis of the kind of things I was reading, which is almost nothing I'd read about it in what you might call popular histories was true. I, by the way, had the same experience about the Russo-Japanese War, and to some extent, to a lesser extent, about the Crimean War. All of these wars, which have involved Russia, have been very, very seriously misunderstood or misrepresented. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that today. It's a huge topic. When Alex and I are able to get back to our history studies, well, we can cover all three of those wars and discuss them in more detail. I would agree, by the way, with the person who says that nuclear weapons are unfortunately very real. I long ago met someone. I used to deal a lot with people from Japan, and I met someone who was in Nagasaki at the time when the city was bombed. And based on what this person said to me, she was a woman, by the way, I have no doubt at all that nuclear weapons are very real and unfortunately very devastating. So let's see. Let's see. Let's see what other questions there are. What can be said about Lavrov saying that Hitler may have had Jewish blood, and Russia now doubling down, saying to Israel that Israel, have been supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine for many years? Well, I have to say, I think this is all a huge mistake. I think Lavrov should not have said that. I think this was I don't really understand why he said that. I'm going to make a guess that he was basically extremely frustrated by that point. I mean, I don't personally believe the claim anyway is true. I've read various Hitler biographies. The consensus seems to be that it's most probably not true. And somebody's written that there are allegations Hitler's mother worked for and possibly slept with. So anyway, not somebody who had, I seem to remember a story that, she worked as a servant in, or an ancestor of Hitler's worked as a servant in for a wealthy Jewish person, that Hitler might be the product of this of an illicit relationship. As I said, I don't believe. I don't think there's any real evidence of that. I think Lavrov was wrong, and I think the Russians are wrong to double down with Israel. I don't know why they're doing it. They must have some reason. Maybe there's something going on behind the scenes here that I don't really understand. But regardless, whatever justification or whatever, whatever is going on behind the scenes, I still think Lavrov should not have made that comment. I think it's offended a lot of people, a lot of Jewish people who, on this particular issue, were sympathetic to Russia, especially given the prevalence of neo-Nazis in Ukraine. But there we go. If Russia takes Odessa, they have Danube connection with a Port Ismail. They will become a Balkan state in that case. How will that affect Serbia and, most importantly, Republic of Srpska's maneuver space? Well, it would make a huge difference. Be under no illusions about this. Obviously, I don't think it would make Russia a Balkan power, but it would massively strengthen Russia's reach into the Balkans. And it would decisively change the balance of forces in the region. And I think if you're talking about issues for NATO, I think that would be probably almost as concerning for NATO, given how volatile the situation in the Balkans is, as probably more concerning for NATO than it would be for the Russians if Finland and Sweden were ever to join NATO, which of course they will. Any updates on how the Financial Times and WEF are coming to terms with a potential dual or multi-world economic system? Well, short answer is they're not. At least if I'm talking about the WEF, I don't think they've internalized that at all. And I'm going to say the same about the Financial Times. I read the Financial Times every day. It's not that they're not coming to terms with it. They're fighting it. They are furiously resisting it at the moment. That's certainly the case in the Financial Times. And I think they're still telling each other, that, ultimately all will be well. The world financial system will remain ours, under our control. It won't break up. It won't fragment. I think that they're increasingly frightened that they're wrong, but I certainly don't think they're coming to terms with it. When do we get to meet your dogs? Well, soon, I hope. They're not around at the moment. I think they're with my wife, but I think in time you will see them both, and they are marvelous dogs. Let's see what is the EU energy sources after they ban Russian oil? Thank you for asking that question, FL Honey Bidget. Can I just say, I don't know what the answer to that is. I read that earlier today. I was on the BBC website. I mean, it's one of the websites I would have to read, and I saw there what looked like an article which said how Germany replaced Russian oil. So I checked to see how Germany replaced Russian oil. And the thing about the article was that it never provided any explanation. It didn't actually give any explanation about how Germany is going to replace Russian oil. What it did instead was that it talked a great deal about the concerns that people in Schwerin, in eastern Germany, have about the fact that an oil refinery there, which refines Russian standard heavy oil, that refinery might have to close. But it didn't actually say how they're going to replace Russian oil. Well, there, of course, is oil produced in many parts of the world, in the United States, in Nigeria, in Angola, in the Middle East, in Indonesia. All sorts of places produce oil. Are they available in the kind of quantities needed to replace Russia? The answer is no. So I don't know how they're going to replace Russian oil. That's a matter for them. They're going to have to work it out. I don't think we're going to run out of oil in Europe, but what we're going to see is rationing of oil. That rationing will not be formal rationing. It will be rationing through price. In other words, the cost of oil is going to rise, and that will mean that some people who can't afford to buy oil in quantities at those sort of prices will have to buy less. And I think that's how it's going to be done. What is the energy? Oh, well, dandelion roots and sunflower seeds, somebody's put. Is the Biden regime in the pocket of the CCP? Have the Chinese bought enough influence to destabilize the USA politically towards communism? I don't think that the entirety of the administration is. I think there are some people who are, still pretty hostile to China. But I'm going to say this. My impression is that a lot of people in the United States and the political class are still very committed to China. They still have business links there. They still have all kinds of financial connections with China. Of course, Biden himself does. I know one isn't supposed to say that, but increasingly, if you go through the information on the laptop, I think that's true. And I think China still has enormous pull in the United States, far more than Russia ever did. So same question I think about Odessa and the Balkans, LNG from the US, pipe dream. Well, of course, oil and liquefied natural gas are not quite the same product, though they can sometimes be used in substitution. At least LNG can sometimes be used in substitution for oil in some things. But LNG from the US, extremely expensive, probably not enough. I was reading in oilprice.com a long discussion of this very same issue, pointing out that LNG from the US isn't going to meet European gas needs, because even if notionally there were enough of it, which is debatable, by the way, all of the facilities needed to produce enough to supply Europe not only would take years, but many of them are most unlikely ever to be built, because there are investment constraints which make it extremely unlikely. So LNG would not be a replacement for Russian pipeline gas, and LNG is certainly from the US not a replacement for Russian oil. So go look up LENR eCast Andre Rossi. Okay, we'll look. Thank you very much for G20. Could you ask what you think will happen to the UN? I will stagger on. I think it will stagger on because all the great powers have some kind of interest in keeping it alive, at least notionally. But again, I think the days when, in the 90s, when the UN was essentially doing whatever the United States wanted it to do, and then the other days which then followed, when the UN and the Security Council became this major cockpit in which the world powers, contained dialogue and confronted each other, but also spoke and interacted with each other. I'm afraid all those days are passing, because we're going to get into a situation of blocks, and the blocks are going to go their different ways, and institutions like the US are increasingly going to lose their relevance. How close is Russia to shutting off all the pipelines? I think closer than they have ever been. I don't think they've made that decision, but I think that before very long, we will start to see pipelines, the movement of oil and gas from Russia to Europe via the pipelines coming to an end. Don't forget, the Russians are building pipelines in other directions, to East Asia, to China, to perhaps India one day. So, there'll still be pipelines, but I don't think we're going to see the same volumes or anything like the same volumes of Russian gas and oil moving westwards as we once did. Now, again, there's questions that I've clearly lost. Might the US government be doing for the MIC today what it has done for Big Pharma over the past 2 years, only vaccinating Ukrainians with bullets? Follow the money. And Zariel very correctly, and I completely agree with him, says 100%. So that's my own view too. So I think that the MIC is, in terms of its lobbying power and its ability to suck money from the US taxpayer, big pharma on steroids. So let's see, from Chile, maybe a touchy question. Do you think today's Russia-West conflict could have been avoided without the warmongering femininity that dominates the West's political figures? Some central figures, and pointing to various people, Nuland, Ursula von der Leyen, Liz Truss, Annalena Baerbock, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson, Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin. Well, it is, in some ways, I suppose, a touchy question. But I have to say, when you look at how many of these leaders are women, one wonders what exactly is happening. Once upon a time, one used to hear that the more women there were in high positions, the less likely there was it was less likely to result in war and conflict. The assumption was that women in government would restrain the men. And on this occasion, it's turned out otherwise. I just do wonder why. I really do. And I can't help but think that in the mindset of some of these people, not all of them, I don't think that Liz Truss, for example, thinks like this. But I think in the mindset of some people, I think that some of these people, they've come to see in Russia something that I think is completely wrong, some sort of repudiation of womanhood, of feminism, I don't know. And I think they look at what they imagine to be Russia's social conservatism. Russia is socially conservative, but not quite the way they think it is. And I think that might be one reason why they seem to be very antagonistic to the country. Not a good excellent answer, I'm afraid. One that I think I'd have to think about an awful lot more. But it's as you said, it's a sensitive question. But look at how many of these people talking in this way are women, and one does wonder, where are they building the gasification terminals, and what will they do for the years between now and when those terminals are operational? I'm not sure, to be honest. I haven't followed the geography of this. I heard that there aren't going to be enough of them anyway, even once they're built. Building them will take years, and all the projections one's been hearing, 1 or 2 years, are apparently wildly optimistic and not based upon what engineers are saying. And moreover, what they're going to do between now and then, I don't think I know. I have no idea what they propose to do. Whistle and hope, I suppose. Anyway, we'll find out. Um, um, there are big economies in the world: United States, China, Japan, India, Germany. These are the biggest economies, sorry. However, this crisis is showing that Japan and Germany's position is not so strong. The yen is falling, and German industry depends entirely on Russia. Well, not entirely, but there is an interdependence. I think it's time to create new criteria to choose the world's most important economies. What do you think? I think you're absolutely right. By the way, I have long argued that this use of GDP, which is purely a statistical construct to measure economies, is deeply misleading and has led to all kinds of terrible errors, policy errors, geopolitical errors, economic errors too. And I think it misleads far more than it informs. And I think we absolutely do need to look into finding out new criteria. That's a huge subject, and that's a subject to discuss more fully another day. Do you have any thoughts on news people, even at Fox News and OANs, who swallow the traditional line on Russian aggression in Ukraine, even if they have lots of resources to know better? Well, I think some of them, frankly, are doing what they, what pays them to do. I think that some of them also probably believe it because they don't really want to look too far behind the truth. And some of them are straightforwardly, as I said, cynical. They they're not doing it because they feel they have to, because that's, they survive from the paychecks of those who want them to say these things, and they don't necessarily believe it either, at least the details of it. But they probably do believe at some level that the West remains a force for good, and they want to promote that, and they want to assist the West to achieve its victory against its enemies. And that means that they are taking the steps that they are doing, even if it involves not so much, I suspect, outright distortion, though you do get that in many cases, but turning a blind eye to the facts. So I think there's multiple motivations involved. Now let's see if there's more questions. Answered the last time. Oh, right. Let's see. Ideological people are totally cynical and have given up on the power of love for the power of power. Agreed. Legal Hawk, thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Do you have any thoughts on news people? Oh, right. I think we've already answered that. Let's see. I think that's it's all about the role of Helsinki. Who will feed Africa? That's such a good question. Given the crisis, we're talking about massive food shortages now. Macron telephoned Putin the other day. If you read the French the Elysee's readout of the conversation, it was frankly embarrassing. I mean, it came across as a chain of insults. But he apparently or supposedly asked Putin to take steps to ameliorate the food crisis, the world food crisis, which is, of course, affecting countries like Africa. And Putin responded, well, if you want to solve this problem, lift the sanctions, end the sanctions. It's the sanctions war that is causing this problem. And of course, that's what Western powers don't want to face. I don't know how this problem is going to be sorted out over the next few months. I don't think it can be sorted out. I think it's too late. There will be enormous problems over the next few months and probably years. Eventually, hopefully, things will find their own solution. We'll probably start to see wheat and food and chemical fertilizers starting to be sold and marketed again from Russia and from other places, and we will get over this. But in the meantime, I think that this is a major problem, and it's quite clear to me that the Western powers, as evidenced by that call between Putin and Macron, are in denial about it. So the Finns helped Nazi Germany attack Murmansk, absolutely, but of course they failed. And it's important to say this because I think now the reality is that the military balance in that part of the world has been shifting steadily away from the Western powers. But this is a big topic. We need to discuss it more fully in a program about the Arctic, which we will surely at some point do. I find it chilling to read the US sends $33 billion to Ukraine, whilst their own people, including vets from Iraq, Afghanistan, and others, are freezing and starving within their own country. If a civil war ever breaks out, can you blame them? Zarael, you have a way of saying things wonderfully well. I'm not going to add to any of the points you've made. I wholly and completely agree. Let's see what others say. Russian ruble hits more. And it is all about the Russian ruble going up and up, which it still is, by the way. By the way, it's now, well, last time I looked, it's about 65 rubles to the dollar. Is the Eurasian Economic Union worth joining for Eastern European countries like Hungary that are increasingly diverging from the EU? Would that be a wise move? I don't think any East European country is thinking of doing it at the moment. I really don't. If there's a major economic crisis in Europe over the next couple of years, if the Eurasian Economic Union, the EU, starts to take off, which it may do, then, of course, we could start to be looking at things from a different perspective. But that's not the way we are at the moment. And somebody suggesting that Putin will sell his surplus to Africa. Well, maybe he will. We will see. This is about food. But at the moment, it's difficult. Ideologues are fearless because they have not comparison reference. They consider reality to be wrong, and their ideology is the way to fix it. Fix reality, fix your biology, fix everything with the wishful thinking. That is why they do not fear nuclear war. They think it is no in their brains. Well, I understand the point. I think there's a lot of truth there. Let's see. Have you heard that Azovstal has been basically destroyed via air attacks today? Photos on Telegram. I have heard this, but it's not confirmed. Until it's confirmed, I'm not reporting it. So, that's all I would say about that. Lots going on in Azovstal, lots going on elsewhere in Ukraine. But, until we actually have full confirmation, I'm not going to report it or discuss it further. For all the people who think Russia's economy is the size of Timbuktu, Russia contributes about 5 to 6% of the global economy. For context, Japan contributes 3.9%, Germany 3.2%. Toilet sauce? I think it's much more than 5 to 6%. That's one thing, a discussion one day we will have. But you're making entirely the right points. I think Russia actually is one of the pivots of the world economy, and that's probably only going to grow. But this is a big topic again, which we will need to discuss in more in more detail. So let's see. Hope Africa will feed itself one day. They did 2,000 years ago before the invasion. Yeah, I hope they. I mean, I think actually Africa should be able to feed itself one day. But Africa has many problems, and it'll take a long time. But I hope one day they will. This is a side issue. One should be careful when talking about things like that. And the Havara agreement, it is a minefield. I'm afraid I've clearly missed a whole line of discussion here. Lavrov most likely trolling after getting upset with the Israelis. Yes, I think you're probably right. I still think it was a mistake, and I think he should have avoided doing it. I think he was involving himself in an issue which, to be straightforward about it, is extremely sensitive to many people, and he was engaging in a speculation which I don't think has any real corroboration. And frankly, I think from the perspective of a foreign minister, I think he should have kept well away from the whole discussion. Anyway, there we are. Thank you for your. Okay, let's move on. I lots to say. H was not. Oh, this is all about Hitler. Okay, Palestinians don't help by sponsoring suicide bombers. I don't hate Palestinians, but when they have access to Israel, they sponsored bombing of civilians. So there was an inexorable pressure towards discrimination towards Palestinians, and I recognize there are many peaceful Palestinians. When they had access to Israel, I see. This is all about Israel, about the discussions. Look, again, the Palestinian issue, which is one of the most important and tragic stories of the modern world, is one which requires lengthy discussion. I'm not going to discuss it in this live stream, which is, as I said, intended to be about another topic. But there's much to say, and at some point, no doubt, we will come to it. Could you explain how the wheat trade operates from Ukraine and or Russia? I've not heard what the West is saying, or what the West is saying on buying Russian wheat. Well, the thing to understand is that Russia and Ukraine are two of the world's big bread baskets. Together, they account, I understand, for something like 25% to 30% of the wheat that is internationally traded. And the point also to understand is that historically, this goes all the way back to the 19th century, but it's still very much the case today. The wheat has been exported via the port of Odessa. And of course, Odessa is now under a blockade. only it's not clear exactly who is blockading it, because the Russians insist that their Black Sea fleet is operating in the Black Sea. They've not closed Odessa to commercial traffic. The Ukrainians say otherwise. And in addition, there's all these mines floating around, some of which have become unmoored and which are a danger apparently to maritime traffic. And besides, one can completely understand a merchant navy captains who don't want to sail their ships through a war zone. So that's essentially blocked access of all that wheat from Odessa. But of course, it's not just wheat, it's lots of other products. We've also had other things like the European Union closing its ports to Russian ships. So the result is that this is massively upset patterns of trade. You've also got spiking energy prices, which is also disrupted world trade because, of course, ships use fuel, and the result is there's far less wheat being supplied and exported around the world. So, as I said, I'm not going to get into a discussion about Hamas, about Israel, about Palestine in this program. It's a subject we should perhaps discuss. I know it's a subject that many people have very strong feelings about. I understand why. I should say that, by the way, that I don't like, I find suicide bombing absolutely appalling, but that's one thing I do want to say. But, that's just one small thing in a massive topic. And I would like to do that issue justice in a proper program, which I don't think I can do in a program like this. Poland will be getting its natural gas from Lithuania through the LNG Amber pipeline that went live on May 1st. Capacity way too low. Poland is currently stealing gas from Italy and others. Well, can I just say, I think that's absolutely right. LNG from the Lithuania, nowhere near enough. And LNG is not a replacement anyway. It's not. You can't just buy LNG and simply use it to replace pipeline gas. What is actually happening is that those companies and countries that are prepared to buy gas in rubles are doing so, and some of it is then being recycled to Poland. So countries like Poland, the Baltic states, Finland, Bulgaria are getting their gas, but it's actually Russian gas paid for in rubles by other people. Now, of course, the Poles, the Finns, the Balts will pay the people they're buying the gas from for the gas, but it does mean, because the Russians are not going to increase gas supplies so that the Poles can get their gas, what that means is that the underground reservoirs that are needed to fill up gas for winter are not going to be filling up as fast as they should be over the summer. J.D. Vance won the Ohio Senate primary. It's a good thing. He has sensible views regarding war, border, etc. It's a huge topic. We're going to be doing a program next week with the great Robert Barnes. We're certainly going to be discussing this primary win. I also think it's big news. Okay, so let's see what others are saying. Given that Russian and Ukrainian banking systems must be inextricably interconnected because they were built that way, wouldn't Ukraine's economy be nearly as hard hit by sanctions as Russia? Very good question, actually. Well, of course, what's happening is that Ukraine's productive economy is collapsing. I mean, we're seeing GDP projections of a decline in Ukrainian GDP. Well, some people put it at 30%, others put it at 45%, others put it higher still. And in truth, it's difficult to understand how there can be any economic activity going on in Ukraine, not just because there's a war, but because the country is running out of oil. There's massive oil shortages across Ukraine. The railway system isn't functioning properly. So how can people actually continue economic activity in that kind of situation? And that must also be affecting the banking system as well, which, as you correctly say, used to be very heavily integrated with the Russian, though it must be said over the last 8 years, since the Maidan coup, steps have been taken to dismantle that connection and to break them apart. But what is actually happening is that as the real Ukrainian economy collapses, money is pouring into Ukraine from the United States. And what we're getting in substitution for a real economy is a kind of phony economy, or if you like, house of cards economy, which is an economy based on massive dollar flows pouring into the country from the United States. And that will, of course, engender more corruption. It will also engender inflation, because obviously this money has to swirl around, and there aren't being products produced to which that money can then absorb. A lot of it will be siphoned overseas and end up in other people's bank accounts. And last but not least, the presence of all this money ultimately is going to choke off economic activity, because obviously you need some funding to keep an economy going. All economies need investment. But when you have money pouring in on this kind of scale, its distortive effects on an economy are profound. So you're going to see a real economy disappear, and a house of cards, an artificial economy put in its place. And when, of course, US funding stops, which it will, this house of cards will crash. Now, we've seen it happen. It happened in South Vietnam, not after the US pulled out. And of course, we also saw it recently in Afghanistan, that the more, if you throw so much money to a country, it actually undermines the economy of that country. What do you think about Turkey invading the Kurdistan region of Iraq? This is something that two things to say. It's again a reflection of Erdogan's policies, him trying to exert influence in all sorts of places. Secondly, obviously, that Turkey is always sensitive about what the Kurds are doing in any of the neighboring countries. For the Turks, it's an existential issue, what the Kurds do, at least so they believe. And last but not least, of course, what it will also do is it's going to create conflicts between Turkey and Iraq. And a wise Turkish government ought to be looking to negotiate with the Iraqis, with the Kurds in Iraq. Erdogan prefers to send in troops, and I suspect he's going to find himself getting into all kinds of problems, which eventually he's going to have to get others to extricate him from. But, it's not a new thing. It's things that have happened like this before. So women are allowed at Davos to make, why? Lots going on. Funny enough, Iran protects Iranian Jews very well. Of course, they can't be at all political. As I said, lots to discuss about all of these things in the Middle East. As I said, I'd rather focus today on the current crisis. It's not that these are not important issues. It's just that I think that they deserve their own program, and that would have to be a big program. And to be honest about it, given how YouTube would probably feel about a discussion about this, it would have to be done on one of our other platforms, probably on Locals. But anyway, it's certainly something we will look into one day. Women, let's see what. So lots about women and in politics and whatever. As I said, I don't want to draw. I don't want to generalize about women in politics from the actions of these particular women that were listed. I have to say, I am surprised at some level, not about Hillary Clinton or or Victoria Nuland. I put those in a different category. But about some of the others that so many women in politics have proved so belligerent over this affair. Once upon a time, I was one of those who believed it would be otherwise, that more women in politics would result in less war, not more of it, less confrontation, not more of it. But I want to stress again, these are particular individuals, and I don't want to generalize too far. Let's see what's going on. Given that, and about the Ukrainian-Russian thing, banking system, more there. Audio keeps cutting out today, Alexander. I think it is on your side. I'm going to say this straightforwardly. I don't think the internet situation in Britain has been particularly good recently. And I'm very sorry. I don't know why it goes on. I hope to get one day another different internet provider, maybe, but we'll see. Let's see. A few more pipelines to Poland will be online, and their needs at least will be manageable. This is by 2022. I wonder. This is about Poland becoming energy, gas sufficient. Over the next decade or so, I think that India will become a major player both economically and politically. Your thoughts, Alexander? I absolutely do think so. I think India is gradually, very skillfully maneuvering itself into a position to be a great power. And I think that is coming. Right, and let's see more questions. Lots of questions. Let's see, audio fine here. Okay, let's see, load more questions. Oh dear. Crumbs, lots and lots of questions. So lots and lots and lots of questions, and I'm afraid it's unlikely that I'm going to get through them all, because as I said, we don't get unfortunately at the moment, Locals isn't saving them, which is a problem. So let's see what other questions they are. I'm going to, as I said, avoid the Palestinian Israeli thing, simply because, as I said, it's such a huge topic, and lots about Vance. When will the common people in the West understand that Russia is our only hope and the only resistance against the globalization and the big reset? Can I just say, my own experience is that if by the common people you mean people outside the elites, there is already a widespread understanding of that. I think that it's fascinating that the further away from the elites you get, the less belligerence there is. And I think that's certainly been my own understanding. Now, somebody says Lavrov's statement was very unfortunate, not only for the unnecessary controversy that it stirred, but also for the missed opportunity to present a deeper perspective on the specifics of the Ukrainian brand of Nazism. Well, I agree with that. I'm also going to say that it was also very unfortunate because it detracted from the very many, very interesting and important things that he also said in his interview, which covered all kinds of topics. For example, he knocked on the head completely any idea that Russia is thinking about nuclear war. But, instead of us talking about those things, we're all talking about that particular question. So let's see what others coming to. Is there a definitive answer about who or what sunk the Moskva? No, there isn't. And I think we need to wait. Let's see what's others. About Poland and gas, I don't think, as I said, it's going to. I don't think a few more pipelines from Lithuania are going to solve the problem. What you need is more gas, and there isn't that much of it. That's the problem. I mean, bear in mind, Poland can buy gas at a price always, but it's going to have to compete against others if there's a limited amount of gas around. And if you're cutting yourself off from the world's major gas producer, a country with planetary sized reserves of gas, well, you're going to be in very serious trouble. Has the US banned Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Nabokov, et al., certain Philistines in the US have? I haven't heard of anything like that happening in Britain, thank goodness. And I certainly hope we don't get into that point. What I have heard, unfortunately, is of various Russian artists being finding it impossible to work here. There was a conductor at the Royal Opera House who was Russian, who apparently had to leave, and I found that very distressing, I have to say. Let's see, what is the concern? So these are fairly lengthy discussions. As I said, I'm now coming towards the end of my time, so I'm going to skip a few. I'm looking now for questions that I would like to deal with. When Macron asked Putin to help poor people in Africa, Putin's response should have been, "Oh, thank you for raising the sanctions." That is exactly what he said. Actually, look at the Kremlin's readout. Putin made precisely that point. I know what Macron's reaction was. The Élysées readout is a disgrace. It's one of the most disgraceful readouts I've ever seen. Actually, it suggested not a discussion between Macron and Putin, but rather a shouting match, with Macron being extremely aggressive and insulting towards Putin, which I hope in reality that he wasn't. And this is from Turius. I saw a video Azovstal being heavily bombed, filmed from a Republic helicopter, but in the dust and smoke, it's not clear what is left. I agree. As I said, let's wait and see what information we get. And Timbuktu was indeed a strong city-state in West Africa and a place of great libraries and immense learning. Lavrov was for once undiplomatic. Hey, perfection is not our lot in life. Legal Hawk, I think you're absolutely right. I think it was a huge mistake, but there we are. You know, as we say as the English like to say about the Greek poet Homer, even Homer nods. Lavrov made a mistake for once. It's remarkable that he makes so few. And I'm not going to hold it against him, but I am going to say that I think it was a mistake because, frankly, that's what I think it was. Well, I'm sorry, others people complaining about choppy video and audio. Sorry about this. Russia hits Ukraine, targeting supply of foreign arms in West and attacking the East. Absolutely, that's going on a huge scale. Let's see what others are saying. I can see why Lavrov went there. The left keep using Zed's background as a way of denying Ukraine's thing for Nazis. Absolutely, that is exactly why he did it. He was clearly frustrated and bored by this, in fact, utterly foolish line of questioning.